Hi everyone, good Tuesday afternoon and welcome to GoLocal Live. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for tuning in for news and politics on a very hot afternoon here in downtown Providence. But we're going to tack a little to the south with University of Virginia Professor of Political Science Jennifer Lawless Skyping in. Jennifer, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Glad to have you joining on the eve of 2 nights of Democratic presidential debates. Looking at specifically, let's talk this evening, then we'll break down tomorrow's, because as we talked last time, it was practically a March Madness draft as to who would be on which evening.
Yeah, I have to say that I watched the draft itself, and it was far less exciting than March Madness, although CNN did everything they possibly could to make it as suspenseful as possible. But tonight, I think the big deal piece of it is that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders will be going head to head. And in a lot of ways, they're the most similar when it comes to a variety of proposals. They haven't really said much to criticize one another, yet as the two frontrunners on the debate stage tonight, it's important for them to differentiate themselves from one another. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see at least some attempt to take the other one down.
So you do expect perhaps, again, some attacks this evening. How important is it for either of them to really, assert that top position, to really come out a winner or a loser? Here we are in July.
It's not that important in terms of the overall polls, but it is important in terms of considering the momentum that these candidates gain and the fact that this really is a race for dollars and donors. And so if one of them is able to emerge as a clear victor tonight over the other, there's a possibility that that person will take some of the support from the person who loses. So this isn't Elizabeth Warren going against Joe Biden or Kamala Harris going against Bernie Sanders. These are two candidates who share a pretty substantial base of support. So any movement is important. Now, it's also possible that it's a complete draw and everything stays the same. So the stakes are not, it's still too early for the stakes to be that high for either of them, but there are opportunities that they could both seize.
And so how high are the stakes for the others on tonight's debate? As you said, such focus being on Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. Can anyone else get oxygen?
Well, it's tricky. I don't know if anybody else can get oxygen, but it could be the death knell for a lot of these candidates. I mean, if Amy Klobuchar isn't able to gain any ground tonight, it's hard to see a path forward. The same can be said for the rest of them. We've had now 4 or 5 candidates who have maintained mid to high single digits in the polls or double digits, and no other candidates have really been able to break into that. And the closer we get to the fall, and then certainly the closer we get to Iowa and New Hampshire, if you're not in that top 4 or 5, there's virtually no path to break into that top 4 or 5 months from now.
When do we expect that we'll start seeing some more hemorrhaging from this fairly crowded field? As you mentioned, of course, if you don't have a standout debate tonight or tomorrow, fundraising becomes more difficult. As you said, the poll numbers don't move. When do we expect to see a significant peel off?
Well, the next set of debates have different thresholds for qualifying. And you've got to double the number of donors that you've had, given where we are right now. And you also have to double your poll performance. And so I find it very, very hard to believe, given that you can only get a total of 100% in the polls among all of these candidates, that everybody is going to be able to double their performance if they're currently polling at 1 or 2%. So my bet is that by the fall, for the next set of debates, we'll see 3 or 4 candidates drop out just because they're no longer eligible to make it in. And I don't think this is going to be a situation like Steve Bullock, who was able to make it into the second debate, even though he wasn't in the first one because he declared too late. At this point, unless there are any new entrants, it's very unlikely that a candidate that doesn't qualify for the next debate will suddenly see a surge that allows him or her to qualify, for a debate in the future.
So could this be a last gasp for a number of candidates?
I think so. It's their last attempt, a lot of them anyway, to make a case to the voters that they should remain in the contest.
And let's talk a little bit about tomorrow night. Of course, if folks are watching this after the fact, at least we'll have a little bit of a preview for Wednesday evening's debate.
Tomorrow night, the big issue will be Kamala Harris versus Joe Biden. And it'll be round 2. We saw sparks fly in round 1. My bet is that Joe Biden is now more prepared for the kinds of attacks he could get from Kamala Harris. So it's likely that there will be a little bit more back and forth. The other thing that's interesting tomorrow night is that it's Cory Booker's last shot to make a case for himself. And Joe Biden is literally going to be standing between Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, who, if they decide to make a case that he's not really up to date on how to deal with racial issues or racial injustice, it's hard to imagine a more difficult set of people to be surrounded by, because both of them have excellent records on that. So my bet is that tomorrow night will be more contentious. There will be more sparks flying, but tonight is very important as well.
How do you think former Vice President Joe Biden bounces back from that first performance, which we had seen was very much on his heels from Kamala Harris? Can he go on the offensive on the issue of race?
He could, but it would be stupid to do so. Right? I mean, you don't play where you're not strong enough, or even if you're strong, you don't play where your opponent is even stronger. So I think the best thing for him to do is to focus on the issues like the economy, where he has a very clear record, where he's seen as very credible, and to have very compelling, credible responses about some of these other issues, or to subtly inject policy proposals about those issues into broader questions and discussions. But I think it would be a fool's errand to try and come out on top on some of these racial justice issues.
Let's talk a little bit. Let's bring in, obviously, last week, Robert Mueller's testimony. Of course, as we said, was it last week, last month, last year? One of the things that came up following his performance was some speculation by some pundits that showing his age might not bode well for Joe Biden, being of that same age as well. Is that a fair comparison, that things could fall off so quickly at a later age in someone's life?
Maybe, but I would say a few things. First of all, everybody's different. Second of all, Donald Trump is old. Third, Bernie Sanders is old. It depends on your mental acuity. It depends on the kinds of questions that you're being asked. It's funny because I did not watch the Mueller hearings. I listened for 7 hours. I was in the car, so I listened to every single word. And without the visual, he did not sound like he had lost it or that he wasn't fully on top of everything. And so I think it's also important to keep that in mind. I mean, he was dealing with a 400-page report that was written, and pieces of it were investigated by dozens of people. I'm not sure how a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old or a 50-year-old would have responded to some of those details. And we know that he's incredibly careful. He was not going to say anything that he wasn't 100% sure was accurate. So I don't know. It might be apples and oranges to compare, a 90-second question about global warming to a 434-page report that had to deal with legal intricacies.
So let's talk a little bit about the other issue that continues to dominate the news cycle. Of course, this is President Donald Trump's remarks about the city of Baltimore, and the subsequent reaction does not seem to be going away.
I mean, nothing seems to go away, but then it gets replaced by the latest thing. And the city of Baltimore remarks, I think, highlight the fact that the ordinary rules do not apply to this president or the tactics that he engages in. Under ordinary circumstances, if your son-in-law, who was a major part of your administration, was also in large part the reason that there were rodent infestations in a major city and that people were unable to stay in their homes, and you knew that, you wouldn't critique that city. You would want to not mention it at all because you wouldn't want investigations highlighting that you're somebody that you trust and that you've given a position of power is somewhat responsible for these things. And Donald Trump doesn't care, and he just doubles down. So, I don't know that there's much to come out of this. It's not a swing city. It's not a swing state. The political ramifications don't seem to be that electorally relevant. So we'll see. But unless the story has broader legs, I can imagine it going nowhere.
So this evening, before we let you go, any predictions? Warren victory, Sanders victory, or a draw?
I think it will probably be a draw. I do think that there are two things to look out for. The first is Bernie Sanders has never really been attacked. When he ran against Hillary Clinton, she was the front runner. And so this is the first time that he's going to be on a debate stage as the front runner, because Joe Biden is not sharing the stage. So assessing how he performs there will be interesting. The other thing that I would expect is a great deal of focus on the Mueller report and the extent to which calls for impeachment should now move forward. I saw today there are now 109 Democrats who have called for impeachment. David Cicilline is one. Jim Langevin is not yet there. He's in the category of let's continue these investigations. But we have seen over the course of the last couple of weeks an increasing number of House members. And so I wouldn't be surprised if the candidates are asked explicitly whether they would, as of today, vote to impeach the president.
Well, all eyes are on the debates tonight and tomorrow night as well. And of course, we'll be probably talking about it next week. So Jennifer Lawless, professor of political science at the University of Virginia, thank you for Skyping in today.
Of course.
Okay, we're going to let Jennifer Lawless go. We're going to get a lot more local here with Mary Beth Calabro, head of the Providence Teachers Union. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.